Hello and welcome to my Stamperia Fortune mini album tutorial series designed for scrap and create. All of the products that I will be using to create this mini album and box will be linked in the description box below, so check those out, purchase your supplies, and follow along. In today's tutorial, we are going to start on the front side of page 3. The first piece of cardstock you'll want to cut measures 6 1/8 by 4 1/2. On the 4 1/2 inch side, we're going to score at 1/2 inch along that top edge and then miter the ends on the 1/2 inch tab section. For the next piece, we're going to cut one that measures 6 1/8 by 3 3/4. On the 3 3/4 inch side, scoring at 1/2 inch along the bottom and mitering those ends on the 1/2 inch tab section. Then we have a piece that measures 6 1/8 by 4 3/4. On the 4 3/4 inch side, we're going to score this at 1/2 inch along that bottom edge and then miter the ends on the 1/2 inch tab section. Next, I have 4 pieces that measure 3 1/4 by 4 inches. On the 3 1/4 inch side, I'm going to score at 1/2 inch on the right side of 2 pieces, and on the left side of the other 2 pieces. Then I'm going to miter the ends on those 1/2 inch tab sections. And once I'm done, I'm going to take my bone folder and fold on all of those score lines and burnish. And then I'll come back and we'll put all the pieces on the page. The first thing I'm going to do is mark down 1/2 inch from the top edge on both sides of my page. Since I have that notch, this flap is going to be on the top, but I need to make sure that I leave room here so that the notch isn't covered. I'm going to add my adhesive to the 1/2 inch tab on the 4 1/2 inch by 6 1/8 inch piece, and then use those 2 marks as a guide for placing my piece on my page, and then I'll use my bone folder to burnish this down. I'm going to open this one up. Then I'll take my 4 3/4 inch piece, apply my adhesive to my 1/2 inch tab, and this one I'm going to line up with the bottom edge of my page, making sure that the edges line up with the side of the page, and then I'll burnish this down. Then I'll take my 3 3/4 inch piece and apply my adhesive to the 1/2 inch tab on this piece. And this one is going to go directly on top of the piece that we just put on. So again, lining that score line up with the bottom, making sure those sides are lined up, and burnishing this down. I'm going to take 2 of my flaps, and first I'm going to place them here. I'm going to need to trim mine just a little tiny bit because they are just a little bit bigger. So an easy way to see this is to put your flap on, and you'll see here that there's a little tiny edge sticking over. So I'm going to bring my paper cutter in and just trim off the smallest little tiny bit. You can also use scissors for this step if you want, but again, just this little tiny sliver here should be enough so that when I put this back down here and close my flap, it is hidden. Same thing with this one here. Making sure this one fits. Once they're the correct size, I'm going to go ahead then and apply my adhesive to my 1/2 inch tabs. And then I'll apply one on each side. So as soon as I get this on here, I'm going to close it really quickly to make sure that it is in the right place. You definitely do not want this to be down below in that score line, because then your flap will not fold correctly. If it's sticking up above a little bit still, you can retrim it if you need to. So it's better for it to be sticking up above than it is to be going down into that score line. I'm going to apply my second flap in the same way. Again, placing it on here, closing it to make sure everything closes properly, and then I'll burnish this down. Once those two are on, I'm going to flip this larger flap at the bottom down. Now this one I will not need to trim because it's just slightly smaller than the flap itself. So I'm just going to apply my adhesive here to my 1/2 inch tab. And then I'm just going to place this, I'm going to eye it. You can measure it if you want to, but I'm going to center this on the flap and burnish this down. And then I'll do the same thing with this final flap, applying my adhesive first. And on this one, I'm going to try to line this up so that they look pretty straight. If you're not good at eyeing things, you can use your ruler here as a guide, or you can measure and mark it if you prefer. And then I'll burnish this down. So we've got our two smaller flaps, our larger flap, this will become a pocket. We've got our two flaps here, and then this one will come down. And then I'm going to place a photo mat in this pocket that will actually hold this page closed. So this is all for the build, and next we're going to jump into decorating. I'll be using this 8x8 paper to cover the front page. First, I've cut from the right side of the page to just slightly under 6 inches. Then from down here at the bottom, I've cut a piece to 3 inches because I want the cat image to be on the front here of the pocket. Then I've cut a 1-inch piece next that I'm going to place here. I'm going to tuck this in here right at the top. Once it's on, I'm going to apply adhesive to the sides and close this to form that front pocket. And then I've cut this to 3 3/4, so I've just cut 1/4 inch off of the top, and I'm going to place this here on the top of my front flap. Once these papers are on, I'm going to open up both flaps. Starting up here, I have cut all 4 of these cards from my 8x8 papers. So I'm going to take the first 2 and I'm going to apply them to the front of each of these smaller flaps. And then I'm going to do the same thing with these 2 down here on the front of the smaller flaps on the bottom 2. Once these smaller flaps are covered, I'm going to open all of the flaps up and we're going to work on the inside. The first piece I have was from this 12x12 paper. I just had this strip left. I did trim down slightly off of the left-hand side. So this is just slightly less than 6 inches. And this is 7 3/4 inch. I'm going to place this here on the base of the page. And then I did trim a little bit off of the top because I wanted to keep the border here. This is 4 inches. And it's going to go here in the center on the bottom. Then I've taken this 8x8 paper here and I've cut this portion from the bottom right corner. This is 3 3/4 by just slightly less than 6 inches. And I'm going to be placing this here in the center on the upper flap. Now for these two flaps here and for these two flaps here, I have cut 4 pieces from this 12x12 paper here, and they measure 3 3/4 by 2 1/2. I'm going to place one on each of these 4 flaps here, and this will be where my photos go, and I will add some decorations later. So I'm going to apply all these down, and then we'll come back and add a few decorative elements. From the 8x8 paper, I have cut this card here from the top, and I've backed it onto a piece of my cardstock. I'm going to place this down here as a tuck spot, then I'm going to add a photo mat later. So I'm going to apply my adhesive down the left side and bottom side of my piece, and then just place this right down here in the corner. That way you could also put photos on the page if you wanted to add more photos, but you don't have to cover up the paper if the photo mat holds the photos. Now I'm going to close these flaps. I need to cut one piece for here, but I need to use my envelope punch board on top of my piece. So my piece I'm going to cut is going to be a little bit more than 6 or a little bit less than 6 inches. So I am actually going to be using this little piece. I have a leftover piece. I wanted some of this blue color. So I'm going to mark this here. And that's where I'm going to place my mark just before the 3. And then I'm going to punch this so that now this will fit here. Now the reason I did that is because I'm going to bring my paper trimmer in next. Because this piece is going to be so small, it's only going to be 3/8 of an inch. So it's actually going to be cut off where my notch was cut out. So I'm going to be ending up with 2 pieces here. But I need that notch, and that was the easiest way for me to get that notch. So now I've got these 2 pieces that I'm going to adhere right here to the top, just using the score line from this flap to rest these pieces on. Now the final thing I'm going to do is just cut one piece of cardstock to 4 1/2 by 6 1/2, and I'm just going to tuck it right down in here for now. I will come back and decorate that once all of my pages are covered. We'll decorate that when we do the other photo mats and when we do the mats for the page. So that is it for the front of page 3 for now. We will probably come back in the final video and add some finishing touches and some additional embellishments. That's it for this tutorial as well. So stay tuned for the build and decoration of the back side of the page, which will be in the next video. I'll see you in the next tutorial.